I'm your host, Evan Courie, editor of marketing and media at Bizcommunity.com. The journalism landscape has changed drastically over the years. The news business exists in a vacuum. It exists within everything else that steals attention away from journalists to keep things running. It becomes easier to personalize user feeds for better experience, but we know that it's not a one-size-fits-all for consumers. Today, joining me all the way from New York in the US is Robyn Peterson, the Chief Technology Officer at CNN. Robyn, how are you?
I'm doing well, Evan. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure and a privilege to be able to be in two different continents and to be having this conversation. So thank you for joining us today. So, Robyn, you've been at CNN for just over 2 years, am I right?
That's correct.
All right. So to our listeners, could you perhaps just tell us what your role as Chief Technology Officer at CNN entails?
Yeah, so I'm Chief Technology Officer here at CNN, and really my mission is to build the technology that helps us tell stories and deliver those to our users, and makes those users / consumers as happy as possible. But really, when I think about it, if you step back from that kind of business-oriented description, what I really think about my job is basically playing with Legos. So I get to take these little tiny blocks that we build that really are code and services, and really assemble them in lots of new ways and see what we build and see if that really succeeds or fails with audiences, and just keep building and playing. So I have a fun job.
So every day is a different experience for you.
It is, that's for sure. That's for sure. I mean, it takes a while to build up some of these Lego creations, that's for sure, as you know, on the Eng side, but it's fun. It's fun. I enjoy it.
Awesome. That sounds like there's never a dull day at the office. So just
I would say so. Yeah.
So, I mean, also, Robyn, you've got some vast experience working in media, right? And so over the years, in your opinion, how has the media landscape evolved?
Yeah, well, it's evolved quite a bit. I would say, if you rewind 5-10 years ago, media companies really depended on social media giants for distribution, to bring their content to users and to bring users to their brand. And that didn't go so well, right? We ended up not having these great direct to consumer relationships that media companies need. And that's what, and a correction to that strategy is what you're starting to see play out in a number of different media organizations, where we as an industry are stepping back and saying, well, wait a minute, I think, the most important part of our business is really our relationship to the consumers that consume our content. And we really need to build direct relationships with them. We need to understand, what do they want to read? What should they read? We can decide that, our journalists can decide that, but what do they want to read? What experiences do they want? And how do they want them? Do they want to receive headlines on their phones and feature length content when they're home on their televisions, and on their laptop? We got to hit them with little bits of stories so they can keep up to date while they're trying to multitask and work on the side. Those are the things that are impossible to know if you have another company in between you and the consumer. Yes. So we as an industry are really trying to correct that distribution error that we made years ago. And we do that by forming these direct to consumer relationships, by getting our user base to download our apps, to come to our websites. And then really, in order to do that, we need to make them much better. We need to make our apps better. We need to make our website, our consumer experiences overall just need to be better. And we get there by really exploring the areas that you just mentioned earlier in this podcast, which basically are personalization, better user experiences, so the user can be delighted as they're working through the experiences that you've created. It's all about really getting deeper with those audiences and forming relationships.
All right. No, the way I see it, media is a continuous evolution, and I just cannot
Yeah.
see what's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. I mean, everything has just skyrocketed in the last 12 months everywhere globally, and it's just amazing to see what sort of ideas are going to start coming out. So, I mean, like, we've spoken about how media has evolved. So I want to go more into technology. How has technology influenced how media users consume?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I think the key there is the technology that our user base has improved, and they now have faster devices. But the trick there is the consumer experiences supplied by the large tech companies have only gotten better, exponentially better than what they were a couple years ago, and that's where our competition lies. Because we are not necessarily competing with each other as much as we are competing for attention with everything else that's out there, right? And we need to create the kind of experiences that our user base wants, that our consumers want, so that they can become, and on the CNN side, informed, but informed in an expedient way, in a way that they want us to reach out to them, right? And that not only means delivering the stories that we think they're going to click on and they're going to view, but really we need to go beyond that, and we need to deliver the stories that they need to know.
Yes.
The things that are really important, right? The ways to break people out of the echo chambers that they'll find themselves delving into when they are on the social media experiences.
Yeah.
That's our job, right? And that's really where I think we excel. And it's critical that we do. And again, you know, just to kind of step back from that for a moment, I think in this day and age, there's really a proliferation of content that's out there, and some of it's trustworthy and some of it's not, right? As we've all seen.
We've all experienced it, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And when you're in a world where there's way too much content and you're not sure who to trust, brand matters.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where I think that's where I think media also is going. We talked about where media is going from a technology point of view, and I know we're going to get back to it, but just as an aside, I think it's really interesting to think about how in the media space, in the content space, brand matters more today than it has for decades. As a reader, as a consumer of information, you need to know that the information you're consuming is trustworthy.
Yes.
And that comes from knowing the brand and trusting that brand. But what we're also seeing in our data is, and kind of data across the industry, is that consumers are very smart and they're starting to cross-check content. So they'll read a story on one, exactly.
Yeah.
They'll read a story on one site and then move to another site and then another site, and they'll try to get views from across the spectrum. And that's really healthy. That's healthy for the discourse of the world. It'll elevate the conversation.
Well. Yeah, it's definitely a good way of thinking of taking what's out there and getting your own view of what's going on, instead of just being told this is what's happening, that's not happening, whatever.
That's right. And in that sort of world, I think brand matters again, because you need to know that those sources that you're looking to are sources that you can trust.
Yeah.
And that you know the point of views that they're bringing and know what to think about them. And that's critical now, right?
Yeah, definitely. All right. That was actually really insightful. Thanks, Robyn. So I know that the future of news journalism is obviously going to change. We're not sure which direction, where, but I mean, what sort of formats of news can we start seeing more of? I mean, social media has been quite something this year. People have had the time, but I mean, in the near future, what sort of formats from a technology side of things can we start seeing coming out?
Well, I think by and large, the formats that you're going to see are the formats that consumers want, right? There'll be different formats for phones, for laptops, for TVs. I think what I hope we see more of is multi-device experiences that help us really understand the story at large, and not necessarily the version of the story that was built for my device. whether that's a swipeable Instagram-like experience, right, on my phone, which tells me the gist of the story, but I don't get all the background that I need if I really want to understand it. Then I go to television, and maybe it's my TV app instead of a broadcast, or maybe it's broadcast, but then I can get in a little more deeply and I can see it with my own eyes, so to speak. And then I go to a laptop and I can consume it and read it. But how does a consumer really explore that story as a story across devices? And then stepping back from that, how does that consumer really engage with your brand across devices? I think we need to have much smarter integration across these experiences, these different device experiences, so that we make sense as an industry. A media brand makes sense, because a consumer is not a phone and that's it, a laptop that's it, and a television and that's it.
No.
A consumer is all of those, and they want to interact with your brand. And if you think about what we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation, media companies need to form those direct relationships with consumers. So by doing that, they need to recognize that those consumers are humans, and humans nowadays have multiple devices. So how do I form like we're friends. We're not friends only when you're on your phone, or only when you're or only when you're on Zoom, right? We need to be able to actually look at those people as humans, and be able to figure out how to form real relationships that are multi-device. And I think that's where it's going to really be interesting when it comes to format. So it's not that there's a specific killer format that's coming out next, and there might be, but I think it's really the multi-device storytelling that I think will be interesting, and relationship building, even more importantly.
And that whole full experience of understanding the story, I think as well would be something that we start seeing. I mean, we're seeing a lot of video content come out during lockdown, and I think everything is going to like add to that whole how we consume news.
Right, that's right. And it's so important when you to get to know that story that's breaking, but then also to go past that story and understand the context. Has something like this ever happened before? Are there things like this happening elsewhere in the world beyond the country that I'm in? And really being able to do that kind of deeper dive, I think, is super interesting, and that'll play to different devices, right? A media company may first tell you about a story or alert you to a story on one device. You could dive deeper on a different device and explore in different ways. And I think that's where it starts to get really fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. So like for media organizations, what role can they play in the future of journalism? I mean, in terms of fake news and news that users want to consume, what role can media organizations really play?
Well, I look at media, so the way that I define media organizations are companies that create stories, that create content. So really, the role that media organizations play in storytelling is paramount. They are the storytellers. We are collectively are the ones, whether it's through this podcast, or it's through a print article, or a text article, or a video episode, et cetera. We're the ones who tell stories, and we need to make sure that our stories are authentic. And as a consumer, I need to be sure that the story you're telling me is authentic. And oftentimes that starts with who's telling me that story, just like it does in real life. There are people that that you believe every single word they say, and there are people that that you take it with a grain of salt. These are the relationships. I don't think the business world, or even technology for that matter, is really different from humans and just how humans interact. I know I sound weird calling us all humans, but it's like, there are people that that you interact with that are very similar to the brands you're interacting with, and that kind of personalizes those brands. But that's key, that we need to be able to tell authentic stories, and that consumers know that the stories that we're telling are authentic.
I definitely agree with you that we all need to be more mindful of what's going on. So I don't want to waste too much time talking about media, but I want to go more onto the technology side of things, because I mean, that is where your specialty lies, I think, right?
Yeah, look, I love it. That's where the Legos are, right?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, during lockdown, everyone has been We've had so much time on our hands, and a lot of people have been on Netflix and different streaming platforms. I don't know, have you watched The Social Dilemma?
I'm a little bit late to the game, so I watched it last night, if you can believe
Oh, wow.
it.
Okay.
So it's fresh in my mind.
All right. So, I mean, it takes a look. I mean, for those who haven't actually watched it, from my side of things, it takes a look at the use of algorithms in social media feeds. And in terms of algorithms, which is probably you could elaborate more on, and news journalism, who is king or queen? Like, is it news journalism or the algorithms?
So I guess the way that I think about personalization, and even just thinking about what is personalization, let's take it down to content recommendations. So if I were to define content recommendations, that's a website or app, an experience that you're on that starts recommending content to you. Hey, you as a consumer should read or watch this thing next, or these 5 things next. So the question becomes, what are those 5 things? I feel really strongly that 2 things really need to happen when you're making those recommendations. One, when you're building out the system that's making recommendations, and by the way, this is how we do it at CNN, we need journalists deeply embedded in the group that's building it. We call these things cross-functional teams. So we'll have data scientists, machine learning engineers, UX engineers, and journalists in a small group deciding, how do we want to recommend content, and how should we recommend it? What types of content are candidates to be recommended, and that sort of thing. But then secondly, really, really important is a notion of what's called diversity within the recommendations. So diversity in recommendations means, if I want to recommend something that's diverse, I'm saying I want to recommend something that's not similar to what you're already reading.
Yes.
Right? That you're already consuming. I think one of the points of Social Dilemma is that it's very easy to fall down rabbit holes. And when you fall down a rabbit hole and keep getting recommended content that's exactly the same as what you just saw, you're more likely to become much more polarized. And then you believe that point of view is the only point of view.
Yeah.
So
those box, yeah, you're not going to be able to open your mind and experience new things. And the point of content creation is to experience something different, not the same thing all the time, I think.
Exactly right. So that notion in content recommendations is called diversity. So we need to have diverse recommendations. If we see a consumer really starting to go down a rabbit hole, consuming a bunch of things in one topical area or in one point of view, we need to recommend things that are outside of that. Because our goal is not to solely, although we are a business and we need to have a sustainable business model, we have a bigger mission than that. And our mission is to inform our consumers, to make sure that they understand the story and the context around that story, because that's the right thing to do. And I think it's really easy for people to forget what the right thing to do is, especially when you're trying to solve a really hard puzzle. How do I get users to do this? But you got to always step back and say, what's the right thing to do? And in those situations around content recommendations, it's really, really important to make diverse recommendations become a major part of your content recommendation system, because that way you don't completely polarize an audience. You do force them, or at least present the opportunities to them, to become more well-rounded and to sidestep that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And I think that's key, right? And if for some reason we're not doing it on the tech side, that's why we have to have those checks and balances, to have the journalists right in the mix with us, to remind us always, these are the stories that we have to tell, and this is how we should be telling them. If that makes sense.
No, it does. It definitely does make sense to me. I just hope that the listeners can actually understand where we're coming from. I mean, it's very difficult at times, but a lot of work goes into what you do. And we cannot please everyone all the time, but it's developing. So, yeah.
Well, that's a fair point. So if we were to explain that a little, maybe a little more clearly, our content recommendation algorithm that's very naive would say things like, Evan just clicked on a story about X. Let's give him more stories about X. and then more stories about X, and then more stories about X. And before you know it, you spent 45 minutes reading similar stories over and over and over again. And you may think that that's the breadth of the world right now. And I guess what I'm saying is, after you've read a couple of stories about X, let's make sure we give you a Y and a Z and maybe an ABC as well, to make sure that you understand there's more out there than this. And to try to break you. Yeah, that's right. We're trying to break you out of that rabbit hole. Now, some people may say, well, that's against your business model. You want the consumer, the user on your site, to just keep clicking and so you can show more ads. But that's not necessarily the case. Sure, that might be helpful in that particular moment to have another ad view so your company can make money. But that's really not what any of us want in the long run. We really, like I mentioned before, we want to form better direct relationships with our consumers, with our audience. And when we do that, our incentives are aligned. We want them to be happy. We want them to be satisfied. We want them to live more meaningful lives, which I think Social Dilemma was an interesting kind of view on that.
Yeah, it was a very it was an eye-opener, yeah.
That's right. And by doing that, if we align on those as our motivations, then I think adding diverse recommendations only makes sense, because you'll have a much more satisfied experience over time. Yeah. I don't know how many, have you ever had YouTube regret?
Yes.
When you pop into YouTube and you'll just watch a video and you watch like 10 more on the same exact thing. And then you look at your watch and you're like,
every time.
Oh my God, I'm never getting that 45 minutes back. And I almost find myself getting irritated at YouTube then.
And you're also,
and that's what you don't want.
Watch.
That's right. That's right. So it behooves all of us. If you want to build long-term relationships, don't do that. Don't recommend and push your users down rabbit holes.
Yeah. So that actually, Robyn, that actually goes into the next trend that I'm seeing, and it's a word that you've mentioned quite a few times today. It is personalization. So what approach should media outlets take in building that trust around what is being published or shared? Like what do we do to gain that trust from consumers?
Well, it's a great question. I think it maybe pulls together a few of the last few topics that we were just talking about. Yeah. At the most important thing is that we tell the right stories, and that's key. And that our audiences understand that we are telling authentic stories. And again, that all comes back to brand, which really comes back to trust. It's all about trust, especially today. So that's key. From that point, you need to make sure that you don't disrupt that trust. So nothing you do on the tech side should ever disrupt that trust. Then you need to make sure that the consumers who are engaging with your products have an enjoyable relationship with them, and a relationship that they want to continue. And that gets back to the last topic we just talked about, making sure that when you start exploring personalization, explore it in a way that you as a human would like to experience it. Not only that, maybe one of your relatives who may not be as tech savvy as you would like to experience it. So you don't want to see an experience that, again, drives people down a rabbit hole. We won't go down that again because we just talked about it, but you don't want that. You want diverse recommendations, but you also want a relationship that's upfront about what you're trading off. Value. So what I mean by that is your privacy.
Yes.
It's paramount that those relationships, as you build them, are really upfront, open, and honest. Again, just like human relationships.
Yeah.
If you meet somebody who's not honest with you and is trying to steal things from you the whole time, yeah, you're never going to trust them. You're never going to hang out with that person again. Yeah. Exactly. So the kind of corollary to that in the media world, especially online, is data privacy. You need to make sure that you are very upfront about what data you're going to use in order to tailor the experience, and what data you're going to use for your business model purposes, whether that's ad targeting, et cetera. And if you're not upfront about it, then you start to erode what we were just saying was the most important thing, which is trust.
Yes.
So that's one quick way that your tech and your user experience can erode the most important thing, which is trust. So again, make sure that as you're building your experiences, that they lead to long-term satisfaction, not just the next click, the next view. Make sure that you're giving your users holistic experiences, which means diverse recommendations. And then lastly, make sure that the experiences you create are upfront when it comes to data privacy. What data are you collecting? How are you going to use it? And giving the user the ability to withdraw consent or not supply consent before you do it. And again, I think there's certain areas of the world where the laws make it almost impossible to not do what I'm saying.
No.
But we need to be that way consistently around the world, and also even within places like Europe. We really still need to think beyond the law. What would we want as a consumer if we're interacting with this product, and follow that direction. Again, it's all like treat everybody like humans,
Yes.
and I think
Human.
you'll succeed. Yeah, we are human. That's
We're
right.
not machines. We're not clones, or maybe we are. We don't know yet. But I
More than a
think
browser, aren't we?
you brought up some really valuable points, which I think is going to help a lot of people understand what goes into the tech side of news and how people can create better platforms for the consumers. And I think the big word that we need to be mindful of is trust. Once we have the trust and build a relationship with our consumers, things will get better. So yeah, Robyn, I think that was like really, really insightful. You've given us so much info, and I think I'm gonna have to listen to this over and over again to really just like, mine is amazing. So
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it. It was a great conversation.
I was all the way from New York, and I'm in Cape Town. Robyn, I just want to say thank you for taking the time out from, I know you've had a busy schedule, and I know your restaurants have just been closed today again. So thank you for taking the time, and I just want to wish you all the best of success for 2021. And thanks for chatting to Biz Community. It's been a
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Robyn.